Fishing Intelligence, a fishing improvement podcast for the modern angler. Welcome back to week 3 of Fishing Intelligence. Already 3 episodes in, pretty crazy. Time has been flying by. This week I'm talking with Tyler Waller. He's an avid bass angler who fishes tournaments and also has a podcast as well called On Another Line. I definitely recommend you guys check it out. And he does live videos with his podcast as well. So, Tyler, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Hey, man, thank you. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be a part of this stuff you guys got going on, and it's good to get on and actually talk a little fishing as opposed to having to run all the equipment for once.
Oh, yeah. So this is probably a little bit different for you. How many times have you been on other people's podcasts and not having to worry about all the sound equipment and video lines and all that?
Just once. I was on another fella's podcast there. I guess it was about this time last year. We were just talking fishing. It's a local show here. I think they've since given it up, but just once. Yeah, it's super nice not having to go worry about having everything, all my ducks in a row as far as equipment goes. And as we were just talking about there a second ago, equipment failure. And when you talk about a live video podcast, you never know what you're gonna run into. So we've had some interesting times in the past. I guess we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary here in 2 episodes. So 1 month from now we'll be 1 year deep.
That's awesome to hear. And we were talking a little bit earlier before the podcast. And how many hits did you guys get last month?
Last month, total impressions. That's views, page hits and everything was almost 70,000. Phenomenal.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear, because I know we've talked a few times going back and forth about the podcast because I was trying to learn from you, and you were telling me how things are just tough with getting the equipment together, getting things rolling, and to see that return must feel pretty good.
Yeah, it does. The thing about it is, we were talking about wanting to talk this tonight a little bit about social media presence and getting that social media presence. And man, it's so tough right now the way, my stuff is strictly on Facebook. If we're going to start transitioning over to, I bought some equipment that'll allow me to live stream both to Facebook and YouTube at the same time. So we're going to double our production.
Very cool.
But it's, with the way Facebook, with the way their software platform and stuff, all their algorithms are set up, it is super tough to get native views. And what's so crazy about it, even paying their prices for their ads and stuff, it's not, you think it'd be far and above what you would get if you were just doing native, people coming to your page, and it's not that way at all. I mean, we didn't throw a ton of money at an ad, but when we very first started, I think we threw $50 at one for the month, and we targeted just people in the fishing industry that lived within 200 miles of us. And we saw zero return on investment. We saw way more views just from having people, especially on Facebook, natively share our posts. Giveaways obviously help out, but if we have some engaging content and people share it, it's far and away way more productive than even paying their stuff. So it makes it really tough.
Yeah, I hear you there for sure, because I've done a few ads for my YouTube channel, and it's you have to throw big money into it to get anything out of it, and that's not easy.
Yeah, no, I mean, let's face it, I'm not getting paid to do this stuff. I do it because, one, I'm trying to get my name out there, and 2, the whole reason we started the On Another Line podcast was to have something to do, as the people up north call it, during hard water season. We don't get ice around here, but it gets so, here in southern Ohio, but it gets too cold to even get out on the boat or out around lake fishing. So my cousin Josh and I were just looking for a way to basically kill some time during the winter and still talk about fishing. But I guess the whole grand scheme of things was what we started is to get as many like-minded anglers as we could, tuning in every week and have a, basically just a live discussion about we talk about tips and techniques and different baits and new baits and like the new Shimano uh, DC reel that just come out. We've had a huge discussion, and the whole thing about that was to try to get with again like-minded anglers and try to learn. I've learned more than I've ever imparted on people as far as knowledge in the past year doing this podcast, because we we're reaching people. We had some people in Australia listening, watching the show, commenting and stuff. We're multinational right now, which is pretty cool. But it started out as something fun to do, but it's now turned into a way to actually. I mean, we've learned a ton.
That's really cool, and that's kind of the two different takes on how these two podcasts are going. This podcast here is pre-recorded. It's just trying to get tips jammed into a single episode, whereas the live take is you get a lot of back and forth discussion. You can interact with the audience a lot better. So I think that in the future, I'd obviously love to tie in a live aspect, but maybe that's down the road once I'm out of college, can set up a little mini studio deal like you guys have and try and roll with something like that, because I think it's cool to hear what people say live in the moment, and I think you get really good organic conversations from that.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes you get some fun banter between the people that are there. I mean, just like we're talking about with you guys doing the takeover this week with the OSU and Penn State. It's not only that for me. Obviously I'm a Buckeyes fan, but it comes down to the fact that like I can't wait to see what you guys produce. But I also, I'm kind of hesitant in that same situation because I know how crazy people are when it comes to collegiate sports. So I'm trying to see what I'm definitely on the offensive here to make sure everything goes like that. But when you're talking about the live aspect, man, like I said, we should have started out like you are doing right now, as far as just trying to do a pre-recorded show and then aired it once a week or something. But we didn't get our feet wet. We jumped straight in the lake, and and like I said, it's been a huge learning curve when it comes to what equipment is needed, what equipment isn't needed. We spent some money on equipment that wasn't needed. So we spent $300 or $400 on stuff that I could have done without. I could have easily spent that money somewhere else. But being a musician helps out as well. So I know a lot of the name brands and how to mix sound and all that stuff. So we kind of took I'm a high school technology teacher by trade, so I took all of my expertise and know-how from all that stuff and threw it in there. But you have this conversation with people going all over the country and even the world. So, like if somebody on the live stream asks a question to us, what's our favorite, like say for example, what's our favorite crankbait? Like if we just choose one crankbait, I would be able to tell them my favorite is a Strike King KVD 1.5, and it just doesn't really matter what color you're throwing. They're pretty much all the same. They're all awesome. But, I've had people chime in and say different crankbaits and stuff that they enjoy, and it's helped me, like, get out of the zone of just buying the stuff that I feel comfortable with. Like, I've found some really cool crankbaits in the past, I don't know, probably 6 months from people suggesting things and baits and other things there too. So it's an all around learning experience when it comes to fishing, and as well as I do. Well, I always say I have a mentality that as soon as I think that I've mastered the art of fishing or the sport of fishing, then that'll be the day that I quit, because there's no way to master it.
Yeah, yeah. And something you said there kind of struck me, talking about the live aspect and people being able to throw out different options and how that can change your mood on, because sometimes you'll pick a lure, you'll get really comfortable with it, and you won't get out of that zone, and you're just stuck using the same lure even though it might not be the most effective. And I feel that, because it's like there's 3 different go-to baits that I'll use, and sometimes I'll get ready to go to a body of water, and then I'll think to myself, like, you know what, I know I'm going to catch a fish on this, but I want to challenge myself to maybe try and see if I can catch more fish on something totally different and just get a big switch up. And I think that that'd be a really cool way to challenge yourself, is to ask people through a live sort of segment, what should I be using that I'm not comfortable with?
Yeah, and that's one of the things in the past, since the year since I started this, is getting out of my comfort zone of fishing shallow water. Like, 100% of the time up until this year, I was fishing from 10-foot shallower. Like I would never go below or go any deeper than that. And it was always, I guess it's just from my background and growing up being a, like a panfish fisherman. I grew up fishing a small bluegill pond behind my mother's house when I was a kid. My cousin Josh and I, who runs the podcast with me, we've been fishing like that for years, and panfish and smaller fish like that, brim and stuff like that, you can catch them any time of the year in shallow water like that. But when it comes to bass, any kind of species of bass, really, they have moods and they are moving up and down basically all the time of the year, and they may move up, 20 feet in one day, depending on what the weather's like. And that's one thing that I've got out of the habit of doing is fishing strictly shallow water this year because I met a fellow that through the show, he's from down around, well, he's not from close to Chickamauga, but he travels to Chickamauga all the time. So I messaged him one day when Misty and I were headed down there to fish, and asked him if he, could basically point me in the general vicinity of some places that we could probably catch some bass because I'd never been on the body of water before in my life. So he was like, "Absolutely, man. Here you go." He gave me some GPS spots, and when I rolled up on these things, they were 20 foot and deeper. I was like, "Whoa!" I was like, this is way out of my comfort zone. Like I don't have lures big enough to get down there. Like everything that I own is, lead or tungsten, and it's like, I don't, half ounce is the biggest I own, and I have very few deep diving crankbaits. But since then, man, like it's been a go-to for me to try to, I try to break the fishing down by the conditions for one. And that was the last thing we talked about last week on our podcast was fishing the conditions and not fishing memory, just like you're talking about. Like, case in point, Josh and I fished a tournament with a bass club that we fish and absolutely murdered them, man. We caught all kind of fish, ended up having like 11 pound for the tournament. When around here, that's, pretty good bag limit. So we go in and, weigh the fish in and, won the tournament. Well, the very next week there was another tournament on that exact same body of water, same conditions, same weather pattern, overcast, probably about 85 degrees in the summertime. Go back out there, same pattern, never catch a fish.
Yeah.
So it as far as the depth thing, I look at 20. I used to think 20 foot of water was like leagues deep. You know what I mean? Like I don't even know if I have enough line to get to the bottom of 20 feet, and it sounds stupid to think about because 20 feet is not deep, obviously, to a fish. Because one thing that I always am constantly doing when I'm in 20 foot of water, and I get this little, like kickback in my brain that's saying, "Man, what are you out here for? This is, you're too deep." And then I look, I have a 21 foot boat, so I can look all the way across the back of my boat, and I look. I was like, it's not that deep. Like if you put a bass anywhere in that general vicinity of water, 20 foot is not deep to a largemouth or smallmouth or spotted bass. So that's one thing the podcast has helped me and Josh with for sure is learning from people, how to get out of our comfort zone.
I love that the boat's only 20 foot. You look across the bow of the boat, and that's how deep the water is. I remember you saying that when I fished with you on the tour, and that was something that stuck with me the whole tour. I kept looking at these boats and thinking, like, man, it's really not that deep. And once we started on the tour, getting down into the Texas area, it's a hot summer. You don't have an option to fish that shallow. So that's when I really started experimenting a lot. Was this summer, throwing big 5-6 inch spoons on Lake Fork and catching fish in 20 foot and Carolina rigs. I've never fished those before until this summer, and those are fish them deep, fish them shallow too, but we were definitely fishing them nice and deep out in Lake Fork.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like that's one thing that's helped me too. Is like I said, 20 foot. If you look at a depth finder at 20 foot, you're like, golly,
Massive.
Like I said, yeah. Why am I down? Like, there's no way. Like I feel like pressure. It goes back to the science side. Like 20 foot of deep. There's no. This fish is gonna the skull's gonna be crushing in at 20 foot. And it's not, it's not even nowhere near that. You know what I mean? It's just another day in paradise for a fish at 20 foot. Matter of fact, that's probably where they want to be at anyway. But it's I all the time. We always said, Josh and I look at, from if you're standing there on the trolling motor, you look back to your motor and you can literally say that's not that deep, literally.
Yeah.
I had to break myself from that. But we were catching fish at St. Clair this year in almost 30 foot water. Which was pretty crazy for me. We were throwing shaky heads and drop shots in like 28 foot of water on St. Clair, which there's very few places that are that deep there. I mean, there's obviously deeper holes, but where I fish, we found some deep holes and was catching them. And that's one thing that I did have was a guide that was with us, that not from St. Clair, but he guides down here in our area, but he knew how to fish or fizz smallmouth, which is something that I've learned new this year too, which is I'm still kind of hesitant to do it myself,
Yeah.
but I see where it's needed for sure.
Yeah. Is St. Clair, is that one of your favorite fisheries? Because I know I've seen a few pictures of you going there, and heard you talk about it a few times. Is that number one for you?
Uh, I would say yeah. I mean, I've just this year started branching out, going to different lakes that are not around here. Like I said, you saw prime example of what Ohio fishery is like. I mean, it's not good. I mean, we had a decent day in Ohio here when you were here. We didn't crush them by any means, but we caught 8 or 10 fish, which is that's a pretty good day around here. But somewhere 4 or 5 hours away. I mean, if I were going to pick three different places that are within that same place, is probably going to be, I would say, St. Clair would be number one, and then Lake Erie would two, and then Chickamauga um, was got to be on the top three there, because we went down there not knowing anything about the lake, literally none. And I told you I talked to my buddy Mark. He gave me a few spots, went there, and Misty ended up catching her personal best largemouth, which was right at 5 pounds, which it was a good trip. It was one of those deals where, but St. Clair, man, and I know you guys got to fish there like one day, but if you guys get the opportunity to go up there and fish for a few days, you definitely got to do it, because it's something else. Like it's a fish factory for one. There's been times that, well, matter of fact, right after we got off the tour with you, we went and fished Alex's backyard there at Buckeye Lake, and caught some fish there. But we decided that we were going to hop in my buddy Kyle's truck and drive to St. Clair, which we thought it was a whole lot closer than it was. Ended up being like 4.5 hours from where we were at. So it was almost like driving from home. But we got up there and we fished from 6 o'clock in the morning and fished until 1 o'clock and caught 60 fish, and probably the smallest one was 2.5 to 3 pounds.
That's awesome.
It was just, I mean, I'm talking crushing them, man. And it's just, you can get in there sometimes. We found them on a Ned rig pattern, throwing just a Ned rig or a Ned head. And they call it the better Ned here. It's poured by a local man here at the bait shop around my house called the Tackle Box. Well, you were there
Yep.
for
Yep.
the Greg Drown. He pours these Ned heads that hold those TRD worms on way better than the actual heads from Z-Man or whoever makes them. But he started pouring them, so he took some up there and got on it was absolute frenzy of fish. It was every cast. We'd just drift across these fish and just absolutely kill them. But I've been there 3 times, and I will say that I have a love-hate relationship with St. Clair. I've been there 3 times now, and that's been actually, yeah, I've been there 4 times, and 3 of the times we went there, we crushed them. I'm talking, we caught fish all day, every day. The very first time there, we went, just got lucky, pulled up on a spot, and just hammered some. Caught my personal best smallmouth the last day we were there. It was almost 6 pound. But we rocked them, and then we went this July, which is the first time I'd ever been there midsummer. But I personally, if you guys out there listening are thinking about making a trip to St. Clair, I would shy away from July, unless you want to make a trip way north by Canadian license and fish there. You wouldn't think it would be a huge difference as far as the water temperature and stuff. It's the same body of water, but there's between the southern shore there in Detroit over to like Ontario, there's like a 20-degree water difference.
Wow.
So
Really?
the smallmouth migrate that way when it gets real hot, I guess, because my normal spots, we caught a few fish. I think we caught 25 in one day. And when you think about that, like, wow, 25 fish, and you're worried about but we fished for those. We really worked our tail end off to catch them. Normally it's like shooting fish in a barrel, no pun intended.
Yeah, when we went, Alex and we went out with Ben Noack, who you're familiar
Yeah,
with. Um, it ended up being a fairly tough day, actually. That was the day that I gave the keys to Alex, and instead of hosting, I let him do the fishing, and because the whole trip he was talking St. Clair, St. Clair. Just I can't wait to get to St. Clair. Like I just want to film you catching fish on St. Clair, and so I ended
yeah,
up handing him the bullseye as the keys. And I mean, he caught probably a good 3 or 4 pounder, but then other than that, it was all maybe like ones and just not big numbers either. But we did catch, I think, 6 species in total, which was pretty interesting. But
yeah.
then I got to get my smallmouth redemption on Lake Erie with Dave Lefebvre the next week. Caught
Yeah,
my
you
personal
guys.
best, five
Yeah,
something. So it
yeah,
was worth it.
yeah. Erie is a pretty amazing place, and I have caught several different species on St. Clair as well. I mean, caught white bass, smallmouth, largemouth, spotted bass. Caught a pike and a muskie all on the same day, which is pretty something normally you don't get around here. I've caught one other muskie in my life, and that was on the Ohio River. But it's fun to get up there. But Lake Erie is, I would say, if I was just going to pick a fishery to fish, 100% of the time and not leave, would be Lake Erie, just for the simple fact that you have the opportunity for multi-species there as well. I don't eat many fish, all the game fish, like all the bass species and stuff. I'm catch and release only, or CPR as everybody's saying, catch,
Yeah.
photo, release. But it's walleye is my favorite fish on the planet to eat. So we always make a couple trips to Lake Erie. I have a buddy there that has a charter boat, and we just pile on his boat and go out and catch a couple limits there, in a couple days, and bring them home and freeze them. But it's one of my favorite table fare is walleye. But that's why I like Lake Erie so much, because you can literally drive 200 yards from one spot to catch 30-inch walleye, and then go back to another spot and catch a 6 pound larger or smallmouth. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I remember back on the tail end of the tour there, I'd never caught a walleye in my life. We were in about 17 feet of water, catching smallies left and right with Dave, and I tied on a deep diving crankbait. I'm like, hey guys, I'm just gonna catch a quick walleye so I can knock it off my list. One cast, and it was a pretty decent walleye, like a 20, probably a 23, 24 incher, which isn't anything massive, but for a first walleye on the first cast, I was pretty stoked. I mean, that fishery is just so productive. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think the DNR up that way, as far as in the state of Ohio and everywhere else that's part of that stuff, is has knocked it out of the ballpark. They when I was a kid fishing that fishery, it used to be 10 walleye per person per day, and they've knocked that down to 6 per person per day, and a 15-inch slot limit there. And I think it's changed the fishery tenfold. There for the first couple of years when they put that 15-inch size limit on there, I mean, you'd catch 100 fish to get your limit of 30, because there's so many fingerling and walleye in the lake. But since then, it's just it's crazy. Like we went, like I said, the guy that's got the charter boat, he's got it set up to troll, which again is not my favorite way to catch fish, because I'm a sportsman. I like to cast and
Yeah,
chunk and line for them. But when I'm there to catch fish to eat, obviously that's the best way to go, because a lot of times I'll pack my bass boat up there. We'll hop on his charter boat, go out troll for an hour or two, catch our limit, come back in. I'll put my bass boat in and go fishing. Go largemouth fishing at that point, smallmouth fishing. So we were there this past year, and we had 5 people on the boat, so we had 30. We had a 30 fish limit, and we caught 30 fish in like 28 minutes.
jeez, that's incredible.
Yeah, it was crazy. And that's to say, like I said, and that's hats off to the conservation that has been done there on Lake Erie. One thing that I'm really glad to see is that the goby population that they feared for years was going to just destroy the lake. I'm glad that it hasn't, and I'm glad that's why the smallmouth there is so giant, because they get like a steak dinner every time they want it.
Yeah, it's almost kind of turned into just a smallmouth feeding frenzy at this point. You just get chunky smallmouth feeding on as many gobies as they can eat.
Yeah, and like I said, I remember when they very first come around, it's kind of like the zebra mussels, and the zebra mussels was, a big scare too, and luckily those things kind of phased out with what it is. You might cut your line or cut your foot on a zebra mussel, but zebra mussels actually are changing the clarity of the water in
Yeah.
Lake Erie. It's crazy. We were in 17 foot of water last year walleye fishing on my pleasure boat. Looked down, saw a big boulder, told everybody to reel their stuff in because we were coming up on a reef. I luckily looked at my depth finder and we were in 17 foot of water and it looked like we were literally about to run aground. It was so clear,
Wow.
which was pretty cool. But and that's the thing. Like the one thing that kind of does scare me though is the Asian carp deal. I think that they're going to be a huge scare.
I was just going to ask you about that. So there's been so much talk about what do we need to do to prevent this? Do we need to block off the canal system from Chicago to prevent any further movement? Because I know right now they have a 3-stage electrical barrier that's basically the final line between where the carp are and where they could be. But there's so many studies going back and forth as to whether they could actually survive and prosper in the Great Lakes, and like, is there enough flow for them to reproduce? And it's just kind of a crazy idea because recently the Kentucky Lake blow up where the bass guys all went out on there, and that was just the entire tournament. It was just social media posting about pictures from their units of stacks of Asian carp and Asian carp flying all over the place. So it's definitely a scary idea coming from seeing something like that happen to such a productive lake. But what are your thoughts on, do we need to just completely block off? Do we need to just keep putting money into partial barriers? What are you thinking?
Oh man, to be honest with you, I wish I knew the answer because it really scares me as far as the fishery goes. They say that obviously Kentucky Lake's overran by them, and they say that if you want to fish Gunnersville and be productive, you better do it in the next year or 2 years at the max because they'll be taken over there too soon because obviously that's all part of the Tennessee River chain.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my biggest fear is, you know, I'm just not gonna lie to you. My biggest fear is running down the lake 70 mile an hour and getting taken out by one.
Yeah.
Because that's a real issue. You know what I mean? Because they jump out of the water when they are startled. Going down, like I said, the Ohio River here, we're cruising down, cutting a clip at 70 mile an hour plus on a bass boat, and you have even a 3-pound carp come out of the water at 70 mile an hour, you're definitely going to feel it. I mean, it could potentially kill you.
That could kill you, yeah.
Yeah. If it didn't kill you by blunt trauma, I mean, you never know, it'd knock you out of the boat and you could get ran over by the prop or anything. I mean, it's a real issue. I don't know. Maybe you would know more about it on as far as the biological side of things. Do they do any other kind of damage to lake other than just like massively reproducing?
I've read a few studies, and it's pretty interesting. The stuff that I've read on it is a lot of the experts are saying, in the end, it's not going to make. They're not going to have massive effects on the walleye fishery, the perch fishery, the smallmouth fishery. So from the expert standpoint, they're saying that even if they got in, it's not going to do a big dent on those fisheries because of differences in habitat type and what they're eating. But I think it's more of the scare from your perspective, which is you've got these up to 20-pound fish jumping straight out of the water and getting smacked. And for people that don't think it happens that often, I was on the Mississippi River for 2 hours on the tour this summer, and Alex got hit in the chest with a Asian carp that jumped out of the water. So it's like when they're there, you know for sure.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like I don't, first off, I used to be a giant bow hunter. I used to be in the woods every time that I was allowed, starting from September all the way until mid-January when the archery season went out here in Ohio. And I still shoot competitive archery as far as 3D targets and stuff in the wintertime when I can't fish. But it's I see these people that are bow fishing these things and stuff, and I'm thinking to myself, that's awesome that they're trying to take some of these fish out, but in the grand scheme of things, that's like they're nowhere near going to come close to even putting a dent in the population, and I don't I was talking to Josh the other day. I don't know how they get rid of them if there's something wrong. I mean, like the only way that you could eradicate that species is by eradicating all fish species in the body of water. It seems like.
Yeah, the only other option would be if you can give them enough incentive to get gill netters, professional gill netters out there, those guys can put a hurting on any population because that's what I did last fall was gill netting on Yellowstone Lake, removing lake trout, trying to help the cutthroat species, and I mean we pulled out thousands of fish a day, just one boat, thousands of fish. So it's like if you create enough incentive, those guys are going to come in and they'll definitely do a dent. They'll do more than boat fishermen, that's for sure. But will it be enough? It's tough to say. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna hit you. I'm gonna hit you with one more question. We've got a couple minutes.
Yeah.
We've been talking about how productive Lake Erie is. Now let's change to a tough fishery. So when we were this summer on the tour fishing with you on Rocky Fork and Paint
Yep.
Creek, those it's not the fishing isn't easy in Ohio. So give me a couple of your best tips for fishing tough fisheries.
We talked about at the very beginning of this, as far as fishing what you know. I would say, we talked about moving away from what you're comfortable with. I would say if you're going to a tough fishery, I would say the biggest thing for me is picking a bait that I know produces. If I was going to choose any bait that I know I was going to catch a fish on, no matter what time of year and where it was at, it would be a shaky head. And that paired with a jackal flick shake is what we were actually using that day. And my favorite is the 4.8 inch jackal flick shake in cola color is my favorite. But pick something that you have some confidence in, and you're confident in the way that you're presenting that bait because that your presentation and your bait's out of the equation. You know that if you put that bait in front of a fish, it's going to eat it. And that's one thing that I would look at. I guess the second thing I would look at would be to not don't disregard blatant signs. Like if you see laydowns in the water, you see stumps, you see rocks, you see different differentiation in the banks or the stuff you're fishing. Don't be afraid to make several casts at something because one thing about it is that's another thing that we tried to talk about as far as Josh and I is, you go down a bank with a crankbait or something, you catch one fish, and you go up and about an hour later come back and catch three or four more fish off that bank. Well, it could be multiple reasons, but one of the reasons it could be a bank that's reloading all day, or two, a fish is only looking, as dumb as it sounds, one way at one given time.
Yeah.
So if you throw a bait up in there and you don't get it in his, whatever it is, 120-degree vision of sight or their, angle of sight there, they may hear it, they may, feel it with their lateral line, but it may not intrigue them enough to turn on it and see what it is. So, if you're fishing very tough bodies of water, I would definitely say make sure you spend enough time on each thing that definitely stands out to you on as far as structure and what you would do to break a lake down. Personally, I don't have the greatest graphs on my boat. I have six. I mean, they're really nice graphs. They're Humminbird 6-inch graphs. I like them a lot, but you're not going to see all the detail and stuff you would like on the new Solix or some of the new Ray Marine stuff or anything like that. So I don't. I use a lot of times my favorite tip or technique to break down tough bodies of water, especially ones that I've never been to a lot, is to get on the Navionics app. And the Navionics app is something that you can pay for, but if you get on an actual desktop computer, you can look at their chart viewer for free. You can see, where the lines in the lake run as far as the contour, the depth contour. A lot of times they'll have like rock piles marked, they'll have laydowns, they'll have submerged timber. You can find all that stuff on the map and make a mental note of it, of where that you can start, especially if you're pre-fishing. You can make a mental note, or basically, there's been times where I've printed out an actual map of the lake from like the Department of Natural Resources, and then transferred all the information from that Navionics app over to that hard hand-drawn map so I can have a place to check out.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate the tips, man, and it was a pleasure talking with you. Thanks for being on here, Tyler.
All right, man. Like I said, you guys want to check around and see what we're doing, you can check us out on Facebook. We are On Another Line, all one word.
Make sure you guys do check them out. They run a really awesome live show, and ask questions because he will answer them. Thanks again, Tyler, and I will catch you guys on next week's podcast. Fishing Intelligence, a fishing improvement podcast for the modern angler.